The TSA has held a grudge against shoes and liquids for more than a decade, and today we'll be talking about the reason for that. Before we start, if you're new here, hello, and if you're returning, it's good to see you again. Alright, let's get into it. On December 22nd, 2001, Richard Reed boarded American Airlines Flight 63 to head to Miami from Paris. He had brought no luggage and only had gotten his passport 2 weeks prior, but was motivated to get onto the flight to Miami. None of the 197 passengers and crew on board of the Boeing 767 would know about the 10 ounces of explosions Reed had in his shoes. He had strapped C4 in a hidden compartment in the heel of his shoes and was planning on unleashing terror only 3 months after the 9/11 attacks, and 1 month after the Aviation and Transportation Security Act. This was the creation of the TSA, checking luggage, and an overall increase of security at the airport. After the flight took off, Richard Reed would try to ignite the C4 using matches. He had struck 6 in numerous failed attempts to light the explosives. That's when a flight attendant would notice the smell of smoke. This flight attendant was Hermis Moutardier, who asked Reed what he was doing. He had indicated that he was using the matches as a toothpick, but that didn't sit right with Hermis.
But walking back, I was like, okay, during the meal service he didn't want to eat anything. Why is he cleaning his teeth?
So she would persist with her questions. That's when the struggle would occur, and Hermis would see a lit match.
Grab him and pull him, and that's when I saw the shoe in between his legs, the match in his hand lit.
An even bigger struggle would happen afterwards, where Hermis would get shoved to the floor. Another flight attendant, Christina Jones, who had been questioning Reed with Hermis, would have her hand bitten by Reed. That's when other passengers would quickly jump to the aid of the flight attendants and subdue this wannabe terrorist.
I jumped on the shoulder of this guy, and 2 other passengers came on him.
There was a request for belts to tie this man to his chair. There were belts coming from all directions.
And you helped me. I didn't know what I would, what kind of help I could give her, but she seemed so panicked and dramatic that I realized it was something serious and volunteered my help.
For 2 hours and 50 minutes, passengers and crew held down Reed. Within that time, they didn't know if there was another accomplice or a device on board, which I would wager would probably be the most stress-inducing 3 hours of their lives. Some reports said that people would walk barefoot down the aisle to feel any heat rising from the cargo below. The flight made an emergency landing at Boston Logan Airport and was escorted by United States fighter jets. The plane landed safely, and other than some minor injuries from the struggle to subdue Reed, no one was hurt or killed. Further inspection showed that the shoe bombs themselves were actually hiking boots, with a drill hole in the heel to have the C4 substance stuffed into it. If ignited, this bomb would have certainly blown up the aircraft's fuselage, killing everyone on board. However, authorities have also stated that the fuse Reed had used could have absorbed moisture, making it difficult to ignite. Regardless, Richard Reed was in the United States custody and no one had died. In the ensuing court case, determined from an 11-page indictment by the federal grand jury, on January 18, 2002, Reed was indicted on 9 charges. These charges were attempted use of a weapon of mass destruction, interfering with a flight crew, 2 counts, attempted wrecking of a mass transportation vehicle, using a destructive device during a crime of violence, attempted homicide of U.S. nationals overseas, placing an explosive device on an aircraft, attempted murder of passengers on an aircraft, and attempted destruction of an aircraft. Reed initially pleaded not guilty. However, in court on October 4, 2002, Reed would plead guilty while also pledging his allegiance to Al-Qaeda. Reed had some notable quotes from court, and before I read them to you, I want to emphasize this is someone who hated humanity and wanted to hurt it, nothing more. In court, Reed states, "I don't care. I'm a member of Al-Qaeda. I pledge to Osama bin Laden, and I'm an enemy to your country, and I don't care." Going on to say, basically, I got on a plane with a bomb. Basically, I tried to ignite it. Basically, yeah, I intended to damage the plane.
You could.
Basically, this jackass needs to learn some synonyms. And luckily, he'll have time to do so. He was given 3 life terms plus 80 years in prison, with a $2 million fine as a cherry on top. And now the rest of us have to take off our shoes at the airport. But this wasn't the only reason why. With the TSA's creation in November 2001, they had a lot of regulations and policies they needed to enact to ensure security at airports. When created, it enforced baggage screening, expanding the Federal Air Marshal Services, as well as reinforcing cockpits. A year later, in December, the TSA introduced explosives detection systems. This is the machine you put your bag onto, and it scans to make sure you're not bringing 6 ounces or more of face wash. And bombs, I guess. A couple months later, in April, the Federal Flight Deck Officer Program was introduced. This is when the TSA began to train flight deck personnel to carry firearms. And in April 2003, the first commercial flight took off with 2 trained and armed pilots. More regulations would take place, but for this video, we will be skipping forwards to 2006, more specifically August 2006. The TSA would demand shoes to be removed and examined. This is because of Richard Reed's shoe bombing plan, but there is also another shoe bomber who is lesser known. The operative that supplied Richard Reed his explosive shoes also supplied them to a man named Sajid Badat. Sajid Badat and Richard Reed supposedly met in Pakistan, or Afghanistan, when they were training an Al-Qaeda educational institution. In 2001, Badat and Reed had returned to Pakistan, then to Afghanistan to collect the shoe bombs. Each with the same explosive plastic material, and each had matching cuts on the cords of each pair. Badat later returned to Britain in December 2001, with a plan shared with himself, Richard Reed, and their handler. They were to blow up 2 separate planes as they were crossing the Atlantic, around the same time period. However, and luckily, Sajid Badat aborted his terroristic plans. Supposedly he was talked out of it by his father. While Reed had gone through with the plan but failed on the plane, Badat didn't even book a flight. He had dismantled the bomb and hid it in his family home in Gloucester, Massachusetts. Acting on secret intelligence, the British authorities captured Badat with links to Richard Reed, with authorities in America conducting a search and seizure of the home that held the explosive, evacuating 100 neighboring families. Supposedly, Sajid Badat's father went around apologizing to his neighbors for his son. In 2005, Sajid Badat was sentenced to 13 years in prison. The judge was lenient because, and I quote, "a genuine change of heart." Throughout his years incarcerated, Badat would supposedly aid with information on other terrorists and would controversially be let out in March of 2010, the defense being he was more useful out than in. In 2014, he testified against Osama bin Laden's son-in-law, as well as providing evidence to terrorist hiding places in the UK. This scheme would prove exponential for the growth of the TSA. However, these 2 shoe bombings weren't the thing that broke the camel's back. It made the TSA start enforcing shoe removal. That finally comes with the same reasoning the TSA banned all liquids. The 2006 transatlantic aircraft plot was a huge terrorist plan that involved over 24 suspects, 7 planes, and explosives disguised as soda bottles. All 7 of the flights were within 2 hours of each other, and they were only stopped 2 weeks prior to the flights taking off. Luckily, through Britain and United States agencies, they would create Operation Overt. It is important to note that Pakistani officials aided by questioning inside men of the plot, but later on a Pakistani judge would dismiss the case. Regardless, Pakistan definitely aided in this operation. Operation Overt involved 26,000 exhibits collected, 102 property searches, 80 computers and other devices collected, 14 terabytes of data collected, 15,000 CDs, as well as 500 floppy disks, all collected throughout the whole operation, while also visiting Japan, Pakistan, South Africa, Mauritius, and Belgium. But the operation wouldn't really kick off until the ringleader of the planned attack, Ahmed Ali's bags, would be checked. Inside was a weird powdery soft drink, Tang, and a large number of batteries, which wasn't enough to detain him, but was enough to start a surveillance due to Ali's past. Ahmed Ali was aiding refugee work on the Pakistan and Afghanistan border in the early 2000s. This was when American troops began their occupation in the Middle East. Appalled by the conditions, Ahmed Ali and a group of people who shared the same anger had their worldview changed. They would turn into Islamic radicalists. After becoming radicalized, there were many important names who had crossed the paths of Ali's group. So this was how agencies were already aware of Ali, especially with the increase in imploring attacks on the UK. So after Ahmed's bags was checked, eyes were glued on him. Eyes from agencies that included MI5. In emails, many of which were unavailable earlier on in court trials, mentioned large orders of shaving cream that was actually hydrogen peroxide, which doesn't sound bad, but the orders were of mass amounts, multiple times. This would lead to the MI5 conducting a secret raid in Ali's flat that he was using. There they would find a bomb factory, one they hadn't seen before. Many of the parts were extremely small, so they were confused on how much damage this could actually do. That wasn't until later on they figured out how many targets there were, and the goal was to only rip a hole in the plane, and have the accident do most of the damage. 2 weeks before the attack was to take place, British police arrested 24 suspects for questioning, resulting in 8 arrests for conspiracy to commit murder and acts of terrorism, 3 for not disclosing information of a terrorist attack, and 1 youth with possession of articles related to terrorism. With 12 suspects being arrested, the remaining 12 suspects were released without charge. This was after years of long court battle that had numerous trials, with new incriminating information each trial. This plus the 2 shoe bombing attempts would create some of the biggest regulations the TSA would enforce. Now, this video is not to say that the TSA is the best, because there are some cases where they just let some pretty bad things go through.
TSA failed 67 out of 70 tests.
As well as just having a bad rep that's pretty justifiable.
Video causing outrage. A 10-year-old girl is given a very thorough pat-down by a TSA agent. The screening lasts nearly 2 minutes.
However, at the same time, the extra stress and the time is worth it when there are examples like the ones we talked about today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. And if you're still here, subscribe. Alright, bye.